She called the cops on him for doing nothing wrong. But what happens when the tables are turned and the truth comes out? It was one of those rare golden afternoons in the small town of Briarwood, where the sun still had some warmth, but the crisp edge of fall was beginning to nip at the air. The leaves on the oak trees were just beginning to change, creating a blanket of fiery orange and yellow against the soft blue sky. Aaron had been up since sunrise, getting the house ready for the upcoming winter months. He had a routine: mow the lawn, check the gutters, maybe tend to the garden. But today, his task was simple: close the pool. It wasn't a big deal, just a matter of putting away the pool equipment, scrubbing down the filter, and covering it up for the season. Every year he did it alone. It wasn't that he didn't have family, it was just something he liked to do on his own. A quiet task. A way to unwind. He was working in the yard, his hands moving mechanically, the rhythmic sound of the broom against the concrete, the only noise around him. He didn't mind the solitude. In fact, he preferred it. It gave him time to think, to reflect. It was his thing. But today, there was a slight shift in the air, a change that seemed almost imperceptible at first. Lisa, his neighbor, had been watching him from her front porch for a few minutes now. She had a tendency to be a little observant, to say the least. Some of the neighbors referred to her as curious, but Aaron had learned to keep his distance. There had been a few awkward exchanges over the years, nothing major, just small talk about the weather or the latest neighborhood gossip. But today felt different. As Aaron leaned over to adjust the pool cover, he caught a glimpse of her from the corner of his eye. She was standing there, on her porch, her arms folded across her chest, watching him. Aaron paused for a moment, trying to brush off the feeling of being scrutinized, but it lingered. Then, without any warning, she walked down the driveway and crossed the street toward his yard. Her steps were quick, almost too quick. Aaron raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. It wasn't uncommon for her to stop by and talk about the neighborhood. But this time, as she approached, there was something in her eyes, a look that made Aaron's stomach turn just slightly. She stopped just a few feet away, close enough to make Aaron feel the weight of her gaze. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and gave her a polite nod. "Hey, Aaron," Lisa said, her voice unusually sharp. "Everything okay over here?" He straightened up and flashed a friendly smile. "Yeah, just wrapping up with the pool, closing it up for the season." Lisa tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as if she were inspecting the pool with a newfound suspicion. "Huh," she muttered under her breath. Aaron frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What's up?" Lisa hesitated for a moment before she spoke again, her tone suddenly more pointed. "I don't know, Aaron. You've been out here a while now, and something about this just doesn't feel right." Aaron's smile faltered, but he shook his head, chalking it up to her usual curiosity. "Everything's fine, Lisa," he replied, trying to stay calm. "Just doing what I need to do before the cold weather hits." But Lisa wasn't convinced. She stepped a little closer, her eyes still scanning the pool equipment like it held some kind of dark secret. And then, as if something clicked in her mind, she reached for her phone. Aaron's heart skipped a beat. He could already tell what was coming. Without warning, she dialed a number. "Hello? Yes, I'd like to report something suspicious," Lisa said into the phone, her voice too steady, too rehearsed. "There's a man in my neighborhood. He's closing up his pool, and it doesn't look right. I'm not sure what he's doing, but it feels off." Aaron's blood ran cold. He was stunned. This was happening, right now. But before he could process what was going on, Lisa hung up the phone and turned her back on him, walking away as though nothing was wrong. Aaron stood there, stunned. The sound of Lisa's footsteps grew fainter as she retreated back to her porch, leaving him standing in the middle of his yard, holding a broom in one hand. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it. Suspicious? What had he done? All he was doing was closing his pool. A tight knot formed in his stomach, but he forced himself to breathe. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she had just been overzealous. After all, people like Lisa were known to call the authorities over the smallest thing. Still, the feeling of unease lingered like a dark cloud hanging over him. He glanced around, hoping to catch sight of any police cars approaching, but the street remained eerily quiet. That's when the sirens cut through the silence. Aaron's heart skipped a beat. The familiar wail of a police car grew louder, closer, and before long it was clear that they were headed in his direction. His mind raced as he quickly glanced at the pool. He had done nothing wrong. There was no reason for them to be here, was there? The police car pulled into his driveway and parked with a screech of its brakes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, stepped out. They exchanged a quick glance before making their way toward Aaron. The officer on the left, a middle-aged man with short greying hair, was the first to speak. "Sir, are you the one who called in a report about suspicious activity?" Aaron blinked, confused. "No, I didn't call anyone," he said, his voice steady but edged with frustration. "I'm just closing my pool. That's it. No suspicious activity here." The woman officer, younger than the man but just as stern, looked from Aaron to the pool, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She didn't say anything right away, but Aaron could tell she was weighing him up, like she was trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. "But someone did call 911, the male officer said, flipping through his notebook. "They reported you as doing something unusual." Aaron's mind raced. Who would report him? He had lived in this neighborhood for years without so much as a hitch. And then it clicked. Lisa. "It was my neighbor," Aaron muttered, feeling the blood rush to his face. "She saw me working in the yard and called 911. There's no reason to be here." The woman officer seemed to soften slightly. She gave Aaron a sympathetic look, but the man was not having it. "Look, we're just doing our job, sir," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But it's important that we check things out. Someone made the call, and it's our responsibility to investigate." Aaron took a deep breath. This was ridiculous. He wasn't some criminal, some threat to the neighborhood. But he knew that arguing with the officers wouldn't do much good. He wasn't about to escalate things further. The officers stood there for a moment, scanning the yard, the pool, Aaron himself. The woman officer seemed to be growing more unsure of the situation, but the man was still standing his ground. But then, just as the tension was about to become unbearable, something clicked in Aaron's mind. The camera, the one on his porch, pointed straight at the yard. Aaron had installed it earlier that summer after a series of petty thefts in the neighborhood. He had been recording his pool maintenance routine for weeks now, just as a precaution. He wasn't sure why, but a sense of control washed over him. Without saying anything, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. As the officers continued to watch him, he pressed a few buttons and opened the app linked to the camera. He scrolled through the live footage and found what he was looking for. Lisa, standing on her porch, dialing 911. The timestamp on the footage was clear. It was all there, her call, her suspicious glance, and her decision to get the authorities involved. Aaron took a deep breath. This was his moment. "Actually," he said, looking up at the officers, "I've got something to show you." He pressed play on the video, holding the phone out so the officers could see. Both of them glanced at the screen, watching as Lisa's voice crackled through the speaker. "Hello, yes. I'd like to report something suspicious," Lisa's voice echoed, followed by her description of Aaron as a suspicious man closing his pool. The officers stood frozen for a moment, the scene unfolding in front of them. The younger officer's face softened as she realized what was happening, while the older officer's frown deepened. "You recorded this?" the male officer asked, his tone now more cautious. "Yeah," Aaron replied, his voice even. "I've got more footage if you want it. I've been recording my yard for a while now." But just as the officers processed the information, a new tension seemed to build between them. The air seemed to grow heavier as the officers absorbed what they were seeing. The younger officer, still holding the phone, exchanged an uneasy look with her partner. The silence stretched on for a moment too long, each second laced with the palpable tension of the situation. "Why didn't you just call us first?" the male officer finally asked, his voice sharp. "Why go to such extremes? This doesn't look good." Aaron's heart was pounding, but he kept his composure. He wasn't the one in the wrong here. He wasn't going to let this turn into something it didn't need to be. "I didn't think I needed to. I was just going about my day. But she made the call. She's the one who saw something suspicious in a simple task." The younger officer took a step closer, looking at the screen, then back at Aaron. "So she saw you closing your pool and thought that was cause for concern?" Aaron nodded, exasperated. "Yes, she thought it was suspicious. I've lived here for years, never had a problem before. But now, apparently, working in my own yard is enough to call 911. The male officer was still squinting at the screen, his expression unreadable. "Well, we can't just ignore a call like that, even if it seems unreasonable." Aaron could feel the frustration rising in his chest. This was absurd. How many times had he heard people complain about things like this happening to them? He had never thought it would happen to him. But here he was, standing in his own yard, trying to explain that closing his pool wasn't a crime. And then, as if on cue, there was a knock at the front door. Aaron turned, startled. His mind raced as he wondered who could be showing up now. The officers glanced at each other, their hands instinctively moving toward their belts. Had the situation taken another unexpected turn? When the door creaked open, it wasn't just another neighbor or passerby. It was Lisa. She was standing in the doorway, her face flushed, her body stiff with uncertainty. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay," she said, her voice not as confident as it had been before. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Aaron's stomach churned. He couldn't believe she was actually here, as if she had done nothing wrong. He watched her carefully, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The younger officer, still holding the phone, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we've been looking at the footage," she said slowly, her tone more neutral than it had been. "And it seems you made a 911 call about Mr. Harris here. You accused him of suspicious activity." Lisa's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I didn't." Aaron stepped forward now, cutting her off. "You didn't think I'd know, did you? You didn't think I had it all on video?" There was a long pause as Lisa stood there, her eyes darting between Aaron and the officers. The younger officer was still holding the phone out, but the power had shifted. Now, it wasn't just about the call. It was about the fact that Lisa had made an accusation without any real cause. "I didn't mean it like that," Lisa finally muttered, her voice barely audible now. I was worried. I've seen people do strange things, and I didn't want anything bad to happen." Aaron's gaze hardened. He wasn't buying it. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about something deeper, something that had been festering under the surface for years. This was about seeing something unfamiliar and reacting out of fear, out of prejudice. The male officer spoke up, his voice stern. "Ma'am, it's one thing to be cautious, but this is a different situation. You've wasted resources, and you've made an accusation without any real reason." Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there, her face slowly turning redder, her hands trembling at her sides. "Maybe next time," Aaron said, his voice even but filled with unspoken weight. "Before you decide to call the police on someone, you should ask yourself, what's really going on here?" But Lisa didn't respond. Instead, she turned and quickly retreated back into her house, leaving Aaron and the officers in an awkward silence. The officers lingered for a moment, the male officer still processing everything that had unfolded. The younger officer finally spoke, breaking the stillness. "Look, sir, we're sorry for the misunderstanding," she said. "We're just doing our job, but this wasn't necessary. You have every right to close your pool without anyone questioning you." Aaron nodded, still feeling a lingering anger. "I know I do. But it's not just about the pool. It's about the fact that people can just assume something because of the way you look, the way you live, and how you go about your business." The younger officer gave him a sympathetic look. "We understand. And I hope this doesn't discourage you from trusting the system. This shouldn't have happened." The male officer, still silent, gave a curt nod before turning back toward his patrol car. His partner followed suit, and the two of them drove off, leaving the quiet street behind them. But Aaron's thoughts were still racing. He had a feeling that no matter what, this moment wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Aaron watched as the police car disappeared around the corner, the low rumble of its engine fading into the distance. The tension that had built up in the air slowly began to dissolve, but the knot in his stomach remained. He stood there for a moment longer, his eyes scanning the quiet street. There was a strange weight in the pit of his stomach, like a storm cloud that hadn't fully passed. He wasn't sure what he was feeling exactly. Anger, relief, exhaustion, maybe all of it. He ran a hand through his hair and took a deep breath. This wasn't over. He knew that much. Lisa's behavior had crossed a line, and this whole thing had left a bitter taste in his mouth. But at least the immediate threat was gone. Or so he thought. Aaron stepped back toward the pool area, but just as he was about to lift the cover, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his brother, Jerome, asking if everything was all right. Aaron sighed, typing a quick response. "Yeah, just some drama with the neighbor. All good now." He paused for a moment after sending the text. Should he tell Jerome everything that happened? It felt like so much to explain, and honestly, he wasn't even sure how to put it into words. How do you explain to someone that your neighbor called the cops on you because she thought you were doing something suspicious? How do you explain that she saw you, just minding your own business, and decided that her discomfort was enough to disrupt your whole day? Before he could think about it any further, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. Hesitant but curious, Aaron answered. "Hello?" "Aaron," came a voice, one he didn't recognize. "This is Officer Ramirez from the Briarwood Police Department. I'm following up on the situation earlier today. I just wanted to let you know that we've reviewed the footage from your security camera and we're taking it very seriously." Aaron stood still, his heart rate picking up again. He hadn't expected a follow-up. "What do you mean? I thought the matter was settled." "It's not as simple as that," Officer Ramirez continued, his voice now more serious. "We've contacted your neighbor, and after a detailed investigation, we've realized something important. The call she made wasn't just a misunderstanding. We've discovered a history of similar complaints in the neighborhood, multiple calls about suspicious activity, some of which are tied to people of color. I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but this is starting to look like more than just one isolated incident." Aaron's mouth went dry. He didn't know what to say. He stood there, frozen, processing what Officer Ramirez had just revealed. "Wait, are you saying she's done this before?" "Yes," the officer confirmed. "This isn't her first time calling about suspicious behavior. And now that we have this footage, it's clear that her accusations were based on something else entirely. Something that goes beyond just her discomfort with you working in your own yard." Aaron's mind raced. He felt the rush of frustration, the anger, the helplessness. "Are you telling me she's been doing this to other people? Just calling the cops on people who haven't done anything wrong?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Officer Ramirez replied. "And while we can't confirm her motivations yet, it's clear that there's a pattern here. What I can tell you is that we're taking this very seriously. You should know that moving forward, we'll be investigating any future complaints she makes." The words hit Aaron like a punch to the gut. He had suspected something was off, but to hear it confirmed, it stung. Lisa had been weaponizing her fear, using the police as a tool to control the narrative of the neighborhood. And she wasn't the only one. Aaron thought about the countless times people had been accused based on nothing more than a glance or an assumption. "Thank you for letting me know," Aaron said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Officer Ramirez paused. "We're sorry you had to go through this. I know this isn't easy, but we're committed to making sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again." Aaron exhaled slowly, the weight of it all pressing down on him. "I appreciate it," he said, his words heavy with the burden of what had just been revealed. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he had to stand firm. After the call ended, Aaron stood there for a while, looking at the yard, the pool, the empty street. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across his lawn. It was peaceful now, but the storm of emotions inside him hadn't settled yet. But as the reality of what had just come to light settled over him, Aaron knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a call to the police anymore. This was about something much bigger. The days that followed were a blur. Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like he was living in the calm before the storm. His phone buzzed with news alerts, but none of them seemed to matter. Every time he passed his neighbor's house, he couldn't help but glance at Lisa's porch, half expecting her to be standing there, watching. He wasn't sure if he was paranoid or if she was just waiting. Waiting for the next move, for the next opportunity to make another call, to stir up another conflict. But then, a week after the 911 incident, something completely unexpected happened. It wasn't just another uneventful day in Briarwood. It was a game changer. Aaron had just finished work and was stepping into his driveway when he saw a familiar figure walking toward him. It was Lisa, but this time, she wasn't alone. She was with a man, someone Aaron had never seen before. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed in a crisp suit, holding a briefcase in one hand. There was something about the way they walked toward him, side by side, that made Aaron's stomach tighten. For a moment Aaron froze, unsure of what to do. But Lisa was already approaching, her face flushed and slightly hesitant. "Aaron," she started, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Can we talk for a minute?" He blinked, taken aback. This wasn't the confrontation he'd expected. "About what?" Lisa shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the man beside her. "This is Mr. Harris. He's my lawyer." Aaron's brow furrowed. "Your lawyer? What's this about?" Lisa looked at the ground before meeting Aaron's eyes again. I need to apologize for what happened. I shouldn't have made that call, and I've come to realize that it was wrong. I've been going through some things, and I made a mistake. I'm sorry." Aaron could feel his pulse quicken. Was this real? Was she really standing here apologizing after everything that had happened? He had braced himself for another accusation, for more hostility. But this was something he didn't expect. Mr. Harris, the lawyer, spoke up before Aaron could say anything. "My client has been advised to offer a formal apology and to make amends for her actions. She recognizes that her behavior was not just an error in judgment, but an unfortunate pattern, and we're looking to resolve this amicably." Aaron glanced from Lisa to Mr. Harris, his mind spinning. He had no idea where this was coming from or what to make of it. Was this some kind of damage control? Was it a move to save face? Lisa stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "I know it won't fix everything, but I want to make things right. I've already spoken to Officer Ramirez, and I've been asked to attend some community sessions about racial profiling and how to address bias. I don't know what else to say, except that I'm really sorry, Aaron. I got caught up in my own fears, and I shouldn't have let them control me like that." Aaron stood there for a long moment, processing her words. His first instinct was to be angry, to call her out for her behavior. But something in her expression, something in the way she stood there, vulnerable, told him that this wasn't just some empty apology. But before Aaron could respond, something clicked inside him, a realization that shifted the entire dynamic. This wasn't just about Lisa apologizing to him. This was about her facing something bigger, something that had been eating away at her long before their interaction. It was about her confronting her own biases, her own role in a system that too often dismissed the humanity of people like him. Lisa didn't owe him an apology, not in the way that she thought. She needed to make things right with herself, something that couldn't be solved with a few words and a handshake. But as much as Aaron wanted to turn his back and walk away, something held him in place. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the weight of the situation or the unexpectedness of it all. But he could feel the weight of the moment, pressing in on him from all sides. Finally, he spoke. "I appreciate the apology, but it's not just about words. You have to understand why what you did was wrong. It wasn't just about calling the cops on me. It was about what that action means in a bigger context. It's about people like me being treated like a threat for no reason other than the color of our skin. That's the real issue here." Lisa's face softened, her eyes welling up with unshed tears. "I know," she whispered, "and that's what I'm trying to fix." The silence between them grew heavy, each word hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. Aaron wasn't sure where this conversation would go, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. But as he watched Lisa and her lawyer walk away, he realized that even if they didn't have all the answers, the first step had been taken, and that was something. The following weeks felt surreal for Aaron. Every time he stepped out of his house, there was a quiet undercurrent of change that he couldn't quite put into words. Lisa's apology had been unexpected, but it had stirred something deeper inside him, a realization that there was still work to be done, not just in his neighborhood, but in the hearts of the people around him. He saw her occasionally, always with a new sense of distance, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't the same woman who had walked up to him in his yard with that suspicious, accusatory look. She wasn't the woman who had casually used the power of the police to make him feel less than. Instead, she was trying to engage with him in ways that felt awkward but genuine. She had stopped making the calls. In fact, Aaron didn't even hear about any more complaints from her. Her participation in community sessions had made a difference, at least outwardly, and slowly, some of her old neighbors noticed. As for Aaron, he did what he had always done. He focused on the simple tasks that brought peace to his life. The pool had been covered and closed for the season, but there was always something else to tend to. It wasn't the yard work that mattered, though. It was the sense of calm that he tried to maintain, the sense of control he had learned to take back after everything had unraveled so quickly. One morning, Aaron was sitting on his porch, enjoying a rare moment of peace. A cool breeze stirred the air, ruffling the edges of the paper he was reading. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he glanced at the screen, it was an alert from a news outlet. The headline caught his eye. Local neighborhood group leads community dialogue on racial profiling after controversial 911 call. Aaron read the article, his eyes scanning the words. The community sessions Lisa had attended had made their way into the wider conversation. The group had grown, and more people from the neighborhood were opening up about their experiences. They were talking about biases, about the real, tangible effects of fear-driven actions, of profiling, and of how these issues were affecting their lives. Lisa had helped to initiate the conversations. She had apologized, and in her own way, started to make things right. But the real shift was bigger than just one apology. It was the start of something Aaron hadn't expected, something that felt like progress. But still, Aaron knew there was much more to be done. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next time Aaron saw Lisa, she was standing at the end of his driveway, holding a small envelope in her hand. She approached him cautiously, but this time there was no lawyer by her side. "Aaron," she said, looking him directly in the eyes, "I just wanted to thank you for your patience, for giving me a chance to learn. I know I can't undo the past, but I've been working on it. I've been reading, talking to people, and trying to really understand what it means to be part of this community. All of it." Aaron raised an eyebrow but didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached out and took the envelope from her. It was a thank you note, simple but heartfelt. She had written about her journey, about the lessons she had learned, and about her commitment to do better moving forward. "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to change," Lisa added softly. Aaron looked down at the note in his hands. For a moment, the weight of everything they had been through seemed to melt away. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't about to pretend that everything was fine now, but something had shifted. A bridge had been built, even if it was a small one. "This is a start," Aaron said quietly. "That's all we can do. Start somewhere." Lisa nodded, and for the first time in a long while, Aaron saw the beginnings of genuine change in her eyes. She wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was working to make sure that the harm she had caused wasn't repeated. She was taking responsibility, and Aaron knew that wasn't something everyone was willing to do. As she walked back to her house, Aaron felt a quiet sense of hope, a feeling he hadn't expected to find amidst all the confusion and hurt. Maybe, just maybe, people could learn. Maybe they could change. But it wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time. And it would take people being honest with themselves about their own biases, fears, and misconceptions. But as Aaron stood there watching Lisa walk away, he realized something important. The real work of change wasn't just about what happened on that day with the 911 call. It was about every small action taken after that, about people being willing to listen, to reflect, and to grow. That was the path forward. And that's what mattered most. As Aaron stood in his yard, taking a moment to breathe in the cool air, he remembered that everything starts with one decision, one step. Sometimes it's a painful step, but it's a step towards something better. And that's the takeaway. We all have the power to change the story we tell, not just about others, but about ourselves. Change begins when we're brave enough to face the truth, when we choose empathy over judgment, and when we take that first step toward understanding. If you've ever faced a situation like this, whether in your neighborhood, at work, or in your community, take a moment to reflect on how you can be part of the change. Share your story, engage in conversations, and be the kind of person who creates space for others to grow and change, just as you're working on your own journey. Let's move forward together.